It was there in the dark of that uncertain night that we watched for the U-boats and waited for the fight. Then a whine and a rock and a great explosion roared. They laid the Reuben James on the cold ocean floor.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of A Fork in Time, the alternate history podcast. Today, sitting in the host chair is Evan Buck, the voice that you were hearing. And of course, I'll always give my customary intro. Hey, everyone. How's it going? It's your boy, Evan. I'll be turning it over to someone who is giddy to get his introduction in, and that is of one Chris Coppola.
Hi, you people. Welcome back to A Fork in Time, and we've been threatening this for a while. We came up with an idea. I want to hear what everyone else thinks, but until we hear differently, we now have an introduction music for our eminent podcast friend, Mr. Dylan Holmesmer.
Hello, everyone. It's good to be back. I guess since this is an audio medium, I will follow up Chris's you can't see me music with the fact that I was once called having a face for radio. Which if you get the joke, you'll get it. If you don't worry about it.
That's why the majority of the people on this podcast have decided to cover their face with hair.
Yeah, Chris.
Ooh,
Chris, for those of you who don't know, Chris is the Frank Beard of the trio today. Evan and I are sporting beards, and Chris is clean shaven. So the ZZ Top band,
Fear the beard. Fear the beard.
Relatively well. Frank Beard had a mustache.
Compared to us.
So the ZZ Top trio is back in action today, ladies and gentlemen. And Chris, do you want to set up our fork for today? Because we're trying to get away from the interwar period and go back to an actual major war that we really haven't touched in a while.
Yeah, go back to the war period.
Yeah.
The war period.
This is something that has always kind of bugged me. Basically, like, if you listen to contemporary, or if you listen to history podcasts talking about the Pacific War during World War II, and the way it is always laid out is the war started in, I will say the war started in July 1937 in China. That is when World War II started. I'm not going to say that's the stance of the podcast. That's my stance with the Japanese invasion of China. They don't necessarily win quickly. They slog through. You have basically Europe gets involved 2 years later. France falls, Netherlands, Belgium falls. Very rarely, by the way, does the Netherlands capitulation matter, but it's about to.
It's about to in this one, big time.
And what you then have is Japan kind of Japan takes over French Indochina, August 1941, which is today's Vietnam. That's the important part of it. The U.S. is trying to deter Japanese aggression and puts an oil embargo on them. This kind of starts the clock ticking in Japanese mind, saying, hey, we need oil. So let's, the strategy of go north, i.e. attack the Soviet Union, or go south, i.e. attack what's described as the European colonial possessions. Basically, that means, I'm not going to say that the Japanese are that into gambling, so we can leave Macau out of it. But
There will be a casino later in this episode, though.
Oh, yes. Maybe not. Well, okay. British possessions in Malaysia, Singapore, all the way into, by the way, Australia, New Zealand as well. But also the Dutch possessions in the Dutch East Indies, what is today's Indonesia. And to do that, they say, well, we need to attack the Americans as well because they have the Philippines. If you can kind of picture a map, the Philippines really put you in a really good position to stop the Japanese from getting resources from these areas. Here's what I've always thought, though. The United States did absolutely nothing when the Netherlands was invaded. Why is the United States going to go to war to protect their colonial possessions in the Dutch East Indies? And the reason we're talking about the Dutch East Indies is that's where the Japanese want it. It has the rubber they need. It has the oil they need. And if they just went for that, one, in our timeline, like the forces they sent there, that was done by like March. That was very quick that they took over all of what is today Indonesia. And two, it provides a ton of the resources they need for their war in China. So it allows them to take over all of the resources they need. By the way, not start a massive war with two world powers that they just can't really go toe to toe with.
Yeah, because let's not think about the fact that Isoroku Yamamoto.
Speaking of gambling, by the way, he might have won in Macau.
Yeah, but so, and I think this is a good way to like find a specific fork for this concept that we're going for. Is, Yamamoto was the main architect of the idea of the plan for the Japanese attack on the United States. Yamamoto had studied at Harvard. He had actually been to the United States. The man who came up with the plan said, this is not going to work. We can do basically whatever we want for 6 months, and then we're totally screwed. So I think if Yamamoto, especially in the concept of the sort of Konoe cabinet and the sort of Japanese planning, if he emphasizes that point a little bit more, like, hey, I'm the guy here who's actually been to the US. We can make a plan. But I am telling you, it is not going to work the way we want. It is not hard to at least envision that if he pushes that forcefully enough, they can drop it and just go after what they really want, which is Indonesia.
Right. And I think if they go that route, I don't think the U.S. gets involved.
No.
I think Britain, while they're angry, they're not going to pick another fight.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing about the U.S. is you have to remember one of the big pain points between FDR and Churchill, especially in the beginning of the war, is the whole war is FDR is an anti-colonialist. He believes in liberal democracy, all of that stuff. But the one thing he's constantly pressuring Churchill to do, sometimes as a condition of U.S. help, sometimes just as an idealistic perspective, is, hey, you need to get rid of your colonies. Colonies are bad. Never mind that we have the Philippines. Colonies are bad.
Okay. I do wish this was a video medium, because I just leaned on my hand and smiled because I thought Dylan was going to do it before I did. However, what specifically did Roosevelt want Churchill to do with the Commonwealth? He wanted to open up free trade with the Commonwealth. He wanted the British to break down their trade barriers so the United States could export to the Commonwealth nations. For a second there, I thought Dylan was going to do the economic theory before I did.
No, it's never going to happen.
Chris will see to that.
So, but
Listen,
this is.
I hoped. I was like, please let him do it. Let him do it.
No, I just had to tee it up for you. But this gets us to a really understandable way that the Japanese would not want to touch, the Philippines and the U.S. because they have more important and more objective fish to fry.
Let's very much stress this. Yet. They want Singapore.
Oh yeah, but why waste time going after the biggest dog when you don't want his food bowl? You can just go pick on the Yorkie who you really want to take food from because his owners are bougie and give him the tasty stuff. Sorry, my dog went to the vet yesterday, so she's been on
That's
the
a very
brain for a couple
interesting
days.
set of analogies there.
Yeah, I'm gonna say I feel I want to work out somehow that the British Empire is a corgi.
Yeah. Yeah. There you
However,
go. Well, and I mean, and another reason why I think this scenario makes a lot of sense is because the Germans and the Japanese like formally signed with the Italians as well the tripartite pact in September of 1940. And who do we already have like at war with and taking over the Dutch at this point are the Germans. And so it makes sense for the Japanese to more so focus on their own territorial ambitions in East Asia and just take over territory that, you know, I guess formally, legally speaking, like once the Germans take over, I think the colonial possessions do like kind of still go with them, but the Germans are already so wrapped up in their own
by the way,
affairs in Europe that it doesn't really matter. They're just like, yeah, Japan, you can take it. We're not going to send anybody to go over and administer those territories.
I think Vietnam is a really good example of this, where like basically when the French government signed the ceasefire, signed the armistice, I'm sure there's some Gaullists out there that are about to come at me, and I'm okay with that. Generally, like there's an argument to be made that the legitimate government of France signed a ceasefire with the Germans and therefore declared themselves neutral. Therefore, all of the colonial administrators in Southeast Asia, in Vietnam, by the way, in our timeline, Syria and Lebanon, North Africa, all of it, they all basically went with Vichy because to them, Vichy's the legitimate government.
Right.
The Germans also set up a collaborationist government in the Netherlands. The Queen fled, but the Netherlands has kind of been soft on, monarchy for a while. So there's a very good argument that these colonial administrators in Indonesia are therefore going to kind of take a step back and not really, support the Allied cause here. And I think it's really interesting to think about like the ease with which the Japanese co-opted the Vichy administrators in Southeast Asia is kind of the same way they'd be able to co-opt these.
I think it'd be the same model. Yeah.
Well, especially
because there isn't a government in the war like there is in Britain that survived that kind of rush in 1940.
Well, and because this gets to the sort of the Japanese co-prosperity sphere idea, where this is a Japanese government of, to use the kind of racist terminology of the time. Sorry, listeners. This is an Asiatic power going to other Asiatic powers and offer, quote unquote, offering them protection. But, for certain people in those administrations in Indochina and Indonesia, they would, there's always going to be some resistance, but a certain amount of the administration the local administration is going to prefer, well, we would rather have to deal with an overlord or a supervisor or a manager who is from our neighborhood rather than halfway across the world who's just going to extract us for our resources and ship them off and not make any, apprehensions or representations of, oh, we're doing this to help you out.
So very quickly, very easily, Japan takes over Indonesia and starts doing exactly what Dylan just said. They just have to ship at a shorter distance, I guess, is the best way to put it.
Yeah, exactly.
Pretty much.
But it's still in Asia. It's still in Asia. And
now that we've got that bow, let me kind of take the episode in a hard turn. A hard turn. I do find it interesting that, like, it'll probably come out right next to it. The last episode we had was Evan and I struggling to bring the Nicaraguan canal back to the Western
Hemisphere. Yeah.
And I am going to say, I promise that this will come back to Asia, but we're going Europe.
First,
this is World War II.
Let me take a selfie in Europe.
This is World War II.
We're going the North Atlantic, I think is the best way to put it, because basically, like, what is lost on a lot of people is everything that was going on in the North Atlantic in the winter of 1941. The United States was basically at war with Germany without saying it. When Germany took over, Western Europe, they had occupied Denmark, and one of the every administrative group of a European colony, I guess, made their own decision. In 1940, when Denmark was occupied, I think it was like a day.
Yeah, it was literally a day.
6 hours,
something like that. Yeah.
The local administrators of both Iceland and Greenland, which were Dylan, you're the one who loves suzerainty versus colony versus all of these status.
All of these legal definitions. Yeah.
Leave it to the lawyer to be fascinated by legal distinctions.
Yes.
Also, he loves that Crusader kings, they married somebody's cousin and therefore they're whatever. The local administrative groups in Greenland and Iceland went to the United States and did say, not. It's very important. I do want to definitely say they did this on a non-precedential basis. However, they asked for U.S. protection. And the U.S. sent troops to occupy both Greenland and Iceland in 1941 before we're involved in the war. And this is part of Roosevelt's wanting to help out Great Britain. One of the things the United States did was, one, declare massive zone, Okay, Dylan, more on the what's the exclusive economic zone?
Exclusive economic zone.
Yeah,
from the Bermuda Triangle?
No. You own
Isn't it 12 miles out?
No,
it's farther than that. It's like 90 or 100 or 120 miles out.
It's like 12 miles.
All the laws of the ocean.
Yeah, it's an exclusive sea control zone or something like that.
And basically the U.S. declared massive swaths of the North Atlantic our zone because we control Greenland, Iceland,
and Iceland, and all
something like that.
Which meant that the United States Navy then is responsible for protecting all shipping in these areas.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're a U-boat, you can be attacked in these areas. So basically, the United States is trying to shift the line of what areas are the British actually responsible for to make it easier on them to cover less area with the limited resources they have.
Well, and to allow shipping from Canada to the British Isles more successfully.
Yes. Basically, and during this time frame, there were U-boat attacks on American naval ships. There were U.S. ships.
See the Apple TV movie Greyhound with Tom Hanks. It's an excellent, the timing's not quite right. I think it might be 42 or 43, but if you want a good visual of what this is like, watch that movie.
So literally the internal title of this episode has been Reuben James, which for Dylan keeps saying he has to go to a gig. You know what? I want to hear you cover the Reuben James. I think that might need to happen.
We're going to have to insert that into the episode somewhere.
Oh, no, that's the intro music. Woody Guthrie's Reuben James is the intro music. I'm saying
Woody Guthrie's Reuben James, covered by Dylan Holzmer. And
all right, give me some time tomorrow, and I'll try and learn it.
This is going to be great.
Reuben James was a U.S. Navy destroyer that was attacked and sunk by a German U-boat in the North Atlantic while the United States was at peace with Germany. I believe, and I want to put this out there to be corrected if I'm wrong. Even during the First World War, when the submarine war was kind of one of the reasons that led to the U.S. involvement, even then, no German U-boat had sunk an American, they attacked liners, they attacked merchantmen.
Lusitania, which was a big part of what got us involved.
But that was an
That was
ocean
British
liner. That was a
flag.
civilian ship.
That was the civilian British flagship.
And British flag.
Yeah.
No German U-boat had attacked and sunk an American naval ship. They just did that in 1941, and nothing happened. Our point is this: they're going to keep doing that, and if the United States is not worried about the Pacific, or by the way, is not attacked in the Pacific, the United States is going to keep up its policy of incrementally pushing and poking. It's not. Russia's the bear, so what's Germany? I don't know. We're not poking
eagle?
the bear, huh?
The Prussian eagle?
The Prussian
No,
eagle.
we're the eagle. Germany's got to be something
A
else.
porcupine?
Wolf.
Oh, yeah. That's a good one.
That's a good one. That makes
The
sense.
Nazi wolf.
The Nazi
The
wolf.
German wolf. Okay. I'm going to take it back to the Pacific for a second. A lot of us have kind of grew up watching Tora. The American naval commanders at Pearl Harbor are complaining about their destroyers being taken away and sent where? To Europe, to the North Atlantic, to escort these convoys. And I think if we're not attacked in the Pacific, we're going to keep sending until we poke that German wolf enough that they react. And I'm interested to...
I mean, that's what makes Pearl Harbor not quite as devastating as it could have been, is because we already had a lot of our naval resources somewhere else, not to mention like slight, reticence, on the Japanese's part. Like, then that sets up for a very interesting, alternate scenario, I would say, not involving a Japanese attack, but just in terms of the movements of our naval resources, until the German wolf gets poked enough.
So I think the point that's actually really interesting for when we come back to the Pacific, which again, I promise our listeners we are.
A lot of our pre-discussion dealt with what we wanted to talk about in part 2.
Listeners, this is Chris inserting this comment. If you guys interrupt me, I will cut you off and do this on my own in post-production. The rest of the team thinks we're going to do part 2 where we get back to the Pacific, but that's part 3. Just telling you that right now. Also, since it is not a video medium, Dylan did just flip me off. I'm going to go tell mom on you. So here we are. I think, is the United States able to push Germany to the extent that they declare war on them? That I don't know.
You're saying that Germany would declare war on the U.S.
if the U.S. continues its provocations?
I think a big part of why that happens in our timeline is because of Pearl Harbor,
right?
And Hitler is just like, okay, well, we gotta defend our ally or whatever. Like, even nowadays, it's seen as such a strange aberration for Hitler to do that. And so I think if what we're constructing in the alternate timeline is a situation where, I think Germany would be more willing to do that eventually. But I also think America itself might actually, eventually be more willing to do so, despite our extreme isolationist tendencies at the time. I mean, we have, for example, like selective service that still happens. It's barely passed, like by the slimmest of margins. But we have to keep in mind, we still have selective service that passes.
Oh, we did an episode on that. I remember that. Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
and so this doesn't change anything with that, I would say.
So,
sorry, go ahead.
What I think might be an interesting possibility, 2 things. One, I can't help escape. This is why I love jumping around different episode arcs, because I get to reference all of them. Go back to the recent episode arcs that Dylan and I were doing on the Gulf of Tonkin, i.e., like the No Johnson 1960s. we have to say we're doing something in 64. We have to say we're reacting. We're just bombing, but we're not going to send troops. Election happens in 64. Then we can actually do something. So kind of a situation of 1940 Roosevelt. By the way, again, Roosevelt running for his third unprecedented term has to say, I'm keeping us out of war in Europe. But he can keep pushing things under the table, keep pushing the Maddox and the Turner Joy. I need to look up and see if those were holdover World War II ships. Those are actually the ships from the Gulf of Tonkin.
The other thing is, and Chris, I think you're exactly right, because when you start getting into like with the sinking of the Lusitania in World War I, that was not through any official legislative act that Congress had passed. It was not a law of the United States that we were following in doing that. That was just a purely economic, diplomatic exercise. Here, if we're talking about like the USS Reuben James, for example, is October of 41. At this point, the destroyers for bases deal is in 40. So that's a purely diplomatic exercise. The Germans are going to make noises about it. Moving into Greenland and Iceland, going to be a purely diplomatic exercise. March of 41, Congress passes Lend-Lease as an act of the United States, an official legislative act recognized by the people or the representatives of the United States as official U.S. policy. That is not like World War I. It is not like destroyers for bases. So once that kicks in, once destroyers start getting escorted, start formally, according to official U.S. legal legislative policy, escorting convoys. If the Germans keep attacking and sinking destroyers or those convoys, I think it is only a matter of time before Congress authorizes Roosevelt to declare war, because although it's...
I actually think it happens differently. I think you do have Americans attacking German shipping, German warships in this area, and that pisses off Hitler enough to do it.
Well, so I was going to say, I think the Americans declare war because U-boats are attacking what is a neutral country, and they're shipping in their own territory.
Right.
But what that does is, even if the U.S. declares war, it's still a defensive war declaration based on German hostility. Right. The reason why I think that distinction is important is because that does not trigger the Tripartite Act, which means Japan has an easy out if they don't want to follow the terms of the Tripartite Pact and join in, because the Tripartite Pact says, the three members, Germany, Italy, Japan, will come to the defense of the others if they are attacked by any not already involved power in Europe or the Pacific. So 1940, when this is signed, France, the UK, Europe is already involved. The US, not involved yet. If the U.S. declares war on Germany, but it's in response to German hostility, Japan, although technically on the paper terms of the treaty, they're obligated to respond, Japan can use that as an out to say, just like Italy in World War I, hey, we know what we're not following the letter of the treaty. We're following the spirit of the treaty, and we're going to stay out.
Letter because it does say
I was going to say it's following the letter because the Tripartite Pact was, I would say, argue almost purposefully written to give these outs, because you're dealing with an alliance, which is two of the countries are in Europe and one of them is on the other side of the world in Asia. So are you really going to consign yourself when you're trying to fight a war in Europe, in Fortress Europe, possibly opening a front against the Soviets? From the German perspective, are you like, we're going to consign ourselves to sending troops over to Asia at the same time? And that's not something that the Japanese are really going to want to do as well. So the pact was written in a way, essentially it was kind of like, when you're playing, I don't know, like whatever kind of silly team sports, like when you're a little kid in school, in the school.
For a second, I thought we finally got Evan on Hearts of Iron.
I was about to say, we got him.
I have not drinking the Kool-Aid on that yet, but maybe eventually.
Give it time.
I mean, I play Age of History too, and so that's just my slow descent into madness. But like when you're
A Fork in
playing on
Time brought to you by Paradox Interactive.
Please
Yes.
give me discount codes.
we need review copies, discount codes, all of that. We will cut episodes
Yeah.
for Paradox. Not just an ad. I think we will cut an episode. But it's like when you're in the school yard and like you're picking people to be on your team, and this happened to me. Like my friends and I would like
You're
we're
still
in a
waiting to be picked,
package.
aren't you? You're still waiting to be picked for a kickball game.
We're in a package, right? And because essentially what we were saying is we're not going to play on separate teams from each other, right? We refuse to do that. We're sticking together. That's basically I mean the tripartite pact is a little bit stronger than that, but let's be real, in practice not as much. Germany, Italy, and Japan are basically saying we're in a package, we're a package deal, and we'll give each other moral support. That's pretty much what it is. But something else I wanted to mention as well is I think this scenario is very likely because, again, when we look back on like World War II history, a lot of us meaning like on the American side, we think of it as, okay, we were strictly isolationist. We were just not going to do anything until Pearl Harbor happened. Public sentiment was, quickly turning more towards interventionism. And I listed this in my document. September of 41, polling showed that 67% of Americans wanted the U.S. to get involved in a war with Japan, and 70% felt that we should risk war in Germany. Roosevelt was the one who, and I've heard different perspectives on this, kind of like how people allege that George Bush knew something about 9/11, not getting into 9/11 conspiracies or trutherism or whatever. But, there's always a certain degree or element of presidents probably knew more than they were letting on before major bad stuff happened. There's a lot to suggest that Roosevelt knew more about Pearl Harbor happening at some point in the not too distant future than he really let on. And so, but Roosevelt essentially was like, hey, I'm content to let the Japanese do something first so that we can have a just war cause to get involved. I think the same sort of approach, but now for Germany, because our attention is much more diverted in that direction. And we have that already. We have that with the U-boats. So I think that just makes a lot of sense for the Americans to jump first on a defensive declaration of war.
So it happens. The United States winds up at war with Germany somehow. Either it attacks the German U-boat and Germany declares war, kind of Dylan's idea of there's enough shooting in the U.S. Senate finally gets on board, but U.S. joins the European war. And I think that's
the key distinction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When do we think that happens? That winds up happening.
I mean, if you go kind of on the Reuben James route, if the sinking of destroyers, you're looking at sort of the fall of 41, probably, maybe a little earlier.
I'd say it happens in spring 42. And the reason I say that is, hey, all of this stuff actually did happen fall of 41. Nothing has actually changed yet.
Yeah.
The change happens in December 41 when the U.S. isn't attacked.
Yeah.
But I think the other part of it is to kind of touch on Dylan's Greyhound plug. A Fork in Time brought to you. No, I'm not gonna. I'm putting the foot down. Netflix, talk to me. HBO Max, talk to me. Apple TV, cram it.
For all mankind.
Cram it for all mankind.
Right.
So, North Atlantic kind of slows down in the winter. So you're not going to have the level of activity.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah. But once the spring thaw starts coming in, that's when shipping activity bumps back up. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So U.S. delays entry a couple of months, but it is solely against Germany. What do we say? What are some of the where does this show up first?
Well, so for one, like you said, Chris, that the U.S. has already been slowly shipping more destroyers, more naval capacity to the Atlantic. I think that's the first kind of trickle down sign. The first thing that starts in force is, okay, well, the U.S. starts really sending not just destroyer escorts with convoys. Those are coming, and now those start going directly to the UK. But you also see naval groups, at least of some size, going between the U.S. and Britain and staying in Britain. So I think the first immediate aspect is Britain has more naval security around the islands to help shore them up. With just with things like destroyers, that also brings anti-aircraft, boatside anti-aircraft. So that helps, Britain against, what's left of, the Luftwaffe going against, the last vestiges of the Battle of Britain, kind of stuff. But you start seeing a concentration of U.S. forces in the U.K. earlier than like a prep for D-Day kind of situation. And that then gets Churchill's brain starting to figure out, okay, well, we've got all these Yankees around. Where are we going to send them?
Well, I think one of the big things is this. When we start drafting, and we always talk about this, when we start drafting Americans, it takes a year and a half for ground troops to really be ready.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a couple of months for naval forces to be ready.
Yeah.
And so if there's one thing that the real ones know about Churchill, is how much he loved, like, the man came up with the idea of something and would not let it go.
Yeah.
And one of those was Norway.
Mm-hmm.
He was, as First Lord of the Admiralty, he was pushing for Britain to preemptively invade Norway in the spring of 1940.
Yeah.
He just didn't get it done in time. And it's an amazing story of, like, Norway gets invaded, and the next day, all of a sudden, there's an entire convoy, massive shipping of British and French soldiers right off their coast, ready to land. They were about to invade on their own. The Germans just beat them to it by a matter of days. And ever since then, by the way, also the importance of Norway kind of threatening supply lines to the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm.
Before kind of the Western Desert Campaign really develops, Norway is one of those places that Churchill looks and says, I can literally send like 12 Norwegian defectors or a couple of commandos up there to blow some stuff up, to like make some newsreel footage, and then leave.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that can help the British people feel like we're still in this war.
Mm-hmm.
So I think once the United States Navy starts showing up, and that's the important thing, is similar to World War I, the Army's coming, but the Navy's there now. And certain other components of the Navy, which we're going to talk about in a little bit,
which we've talked about in Nicaragua,
if they don't have some other commitments somewhere else in the Pacific.
Yeah.
First thing the United States Navy teams up with the British and does is neutralizes Norway. I don't think they feel the need to invade.
Yeah. At least not yet.
Right. It's based, but they do neutralize the air bases. And hey, Germany actually had surface ships hiding in these Norwegian fjords. And it is one of those stories throughout World War II of the British trying to like do something about them. In fact, in that kind of previous invasion, one of the reasons they weren't able to get in there is because they were scared of sending aircraft carriers close, because they wound up losing an aircraft carrier in 1940 to German surface ships. The United States has plenty of battleships, plenty of cruisers. isn't really worried about any of this, can sail right up to Norway, and Toronto has happened. Toronto, which is the British attack on the Italian Navy, is kind of the first naval air attack on ships at base. Pearl Harbor doesn't happen, but that doesn't mean the United States won't do the same thing to the Tirpitz or the Gneisenau and the Scharnhorst, which are two. The Gneisenau and the Scharnhorst are the German cruisers. Tirpitz is basically another Bismarck. It's a sister ship of the Bismarck. They're gone.
Yeah,
they're gone early summer. That's the first. The United States Navy might stop off to refueling in Scapa Flow. Then they're going to take it out Norway.
Yeah, but the other thing, speaking of Scapa Flow, that does is if the U.S. Navy is taking care of naval operations in and around Norway, that frees up. And with American naval presence around the islands, that frees up the main British fleet in Scapa Flow to, actually try and do something. Because for most of the early part of the war, it just sat there. That's all it did, because they were too afraid to actually use it for anything because they didn't want to lose too much of it. But if you have American naval support, the British Navy actually might end up being more impactful in the early days of the war than it was in our timeline. And what was also in Scapa Flow? All of the Norwegian commandos that escaped after the Nazis invaded.
That's what I was going to say. We have not only all the Norwegian commandos, we also have the Norwegian government in exile in London. So the King of Norway is right there.
Yeah. So even though there's not necessarily going to be any retaking of Norway yet.
Not immediately.
Once the Americans show up, while the Americans are getting gas in Scapa Flow, especially all the guys from Minnesota and Wisconsin that are on those ships, they're like, oh, how you doing? Yeah. Oh, yeah, we're going to go see the homeland, Oh, you want to catch a ride later? Sure. Sorry, my family came out there.
I don't like what this means for some future things for my family, but whatever. I want my grandfather to go back to the old country too, and I don't care what you say. Naples is better than Narvik. Okay.
Oh, I am not going to argue that anytime. But you get what I mean.
Yeah, exactly.
As long as Norwegian cuisine is not exported any further than the fjords, I am okay with this outcome.
Well, and so the other thing is, while we're talking about Norway, Chris, you mentioned that, so one, you've got the U.S. Navy actually doing damage to German surface ships in Norway. You've got the Norwegian government, the U.S., the British thinking more realistically of Norway as an actual option, because Churchill always kind of obsessed with it. They did 10 or 12 operations in Norway with commando units and stuff, but they didn't, for several years, that was really all they could do. But Norway is a more attractive option. And like you said, Chris, this whole time, because Barbarossa's already started, Stalin is screaming from the rooftops, open a second front, but also get me some stuff. Basically, the only way for the U.S. and the U.K. to get supplies relatively conveniently to the Soviet Union is around Norway, unless they go through the British colonies in East Asia, or they try and go around Alaska. So if you have Norway as an attack option, that is a chip that Churchill and Roosevelt can throw to Stalin and say, hey, look, this whole second front thing, it's going to take some time. We got to figure it out. But at the very least, what we can do is we can secure in the summer months, when the access is open, we can secure convoy delivery to places like Archangel, the northern Russian coast, to get you at the very least some supplies while you're having to fight off the Germans.
I think that's true. I think the other thing this also does, and it was a good point, even in our timeline, the United States gave Russia a ton of merchant ships and let them flag them as Soviet ships so they could sail through Japanese waters and bring in a ton of food supplies there. if the United States has no issue with Japan,
They don't even have to do that.
that's part of it. I think the other thing is having the Pacific be open to Allied traffic
Mhm.
also makes the Iranian corridor
Mhm.
when that happens.
Yes, and I was just going to say, I think this leads. I don't think this necessarily changes the timeline for the Anglo-Soviet invasion, because that already happens, I think, in like August of 41.
It
Yeah.
does.
But what I think that does is it makes the Iranian theater even more important in this timeline, and possibly ends up moving up the because all of the focus is on the European theater. It moves up the eventual Tehran conference
Mhm.
between the U.S., the British, and the Soviets, which in our timeline happens in 43. I think that moves that up by
Well, so there's one more thing I want to do,
yes.
and then we're coming to Tehran. Bella Woods.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I think I know where you're going, Chris.
Bella Wood. I love that I can say that because it is a little bit of a stretch for me
It's
to
a
get
thing.
from there
Yeah.
to where we're talking about. But Dylan knew exactly where I was. He saw the path.
Yeah.
Bella Woods, 1917, was an American offensive in the First World War, done by the only American troops that were actually able to fight like 3 months after the war started. That was the United States Marines. If the United States gets involved, we don't have the Marines dealing with the Pacific. They are the American amphibious specialists. They are ready and roaring to go. So, Dylan, where do they go?
So our theory was, because the Marines are the force that's ready to go, and because they're in the UK, we've already decided they're probably not going to take Norway as their sort of first point of attack, but all eyes are going to be towards Europe. So they're going to be looking for somewhere to try and open up and take the fight back to mainland European soil. Churchill is screeching about, going after the soft underbelly of the Axis, i.e., North Africa, Italy, the Mediterranean. The United States at this point, they haven't bought into that plan. So, one big thing is the United States has not been in North Africa, so they're still in the sort of, and this is a common stereotype of many American commanders across all time is, it's the sort of Custer strategy of why would I go around something when I can just go straight through it? Well, as the crow flies, the shortest point between France and the UK is the English Channel. And the UK actually historically has had, over various points in time, going all the way back to the sort of Norman conquest and the Plantagenet dynasty when England controlled half of France, several islands. Yes, Chris, it just sighed. I did bring Crusader Kings into a Hearts of Iron 4 fight. The UK has, there are several islands in the channel, Guernsey and I forget the other one.
Guernsey and Jersey.
Guernsey and Jersey. Yeah, of course. That's why I forgot. So they have a couple of islands, and they just so happen to sit across from, very close to where we eventually did land in Normandy, but they're even closer to. Basically, if you think of France, it has, Europe is a giant peninsula with peninsulas sticking off of it. Two of the smaller peninsulas that stick off of Europe are Brittany, which is kind of the upper, if you're looking at a map,
Like upper northwest,
the upper
France.
left corner of France.
Yeah.
And then there's
it's fun thing how all these develop. At the tip of these peninsulas, picture Miami. That's a good way to put it. There's always a port at the end of them. Brittany is Brest. The other peninsula, which I want to hear you trying to say it, Dylan, because you did not believe me when I said it first.
Yeah, Cotentin.
And what's the port at the end of that?
It is Cherbourg.
So if you've got massive naval control, it actually makes a lot of sense to try and like pinch either side of a peninsula and then take the port so that you've got like a little bit of a land to stock up supply of.
Yeah, it's a forward operating base essentially
Right.
is what you're trying to get. So I think the first thing that the USMC is going to do is they're going to do, they're going to test the waters. They haven't really done amphibious invasions. They haven't cut their teeth in North Africa, like I was saying. But instead, what they're going to do is they're going to use the U.S. Navy's increased control of the channel to cut their teeth instead on Guernsey and Jersey with an eye towards trying to take Cherbourg either directly, or there's also a bunch of beaches that kind of look like Normandy directly across from Guernsey and Jersey on this Cotentin Peninsula. So it's going to kind of mirror some of the Normandy that we picture from our timeline, just sort of rotated 90 degrees, where they're going to try and do, at least the plan is going to be a sort of smaller scale but similar thing on the Cotentin Peninsula to try and go after Cherbourg.
Eventually.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think what happens in kind of spring, summer 1942 is they do take Guernsey and Jersey. Then, Evan, what were you saying about Tehran?
Well, I mean, what I was saying was basically we now have in the alternate timeline that we're constructing a sooner Tehran conference. And the agreement that we come out of in our timeline is because a major reason why it happened is because Stalin is, of course, as he always is, asking, I am no longer asking. Now I'm screaming about it. But he wants us to help open up a Western front to help relieve some pressure for him fighting the Germans on the eastern side. And in this timeline, I could see with us staging, the U.S. coming off of Guernsey and Jersey, having a quasi Normandy, by comparison, invasion in the alternate timeline. Churchill being able to then get his long held dreams of trying to get to the underbelly in the Mediterranean. So really what we're actually even giving Stalin a little bit more than what he's wanting, because he just wants us to open up something to help relieve pressure on him. The US and the UK are able to look at the situation and say, okay, we'll split off our attacks a little bit. There'll be some support and coordination for both sides, for both fronts, but really the US will be the one mainly focused on the French side. The UK will be in the Mediterranean. That's where we see a sooner Tehran conference eventually taking things. So I do think what would be interesting to see is some of like the fake army stuff that the British did.
The Operation Paperclip or whatever.
Yeah, that's exactly
not Paperclip.
No,
actually, no, that's a different one. Yeah,
that's a different.
No.
Yeah.
What was Operation
Mincemeat?
Thank you, Mincemeat. Very different. I don't know why I thought Paperclip.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see, some diversionary tactics, trying to confuse the Germans and think that we're going to be invading somewhere else.
The inflatable tanks and all that stuff.
I could see that actually with Churchill's well-known affinity for trying to get into Norway. I can see that actually being the diversionary tactic that's used.
I think the one thing this does, which is really interesting, is that you have theaters that are just the British.
Yeah.
And theaters that are just the Americans.
Right.
And I think the interesting thing that does is, hey, maybe Monty isn't a punchline to Americans. Because
they don't deal with them.
They don't have the friction. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, and I think if you look at, the U.S., like I said, the Americans are just going to go, okay, shortest route to the problem. Let's just start hammering it with whatever we've got. France makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
The UK, along with Churchill's constant chirping about going after the soft underbelly, the UK is also naturally going to be more focused. Yes, they're worried about France, but they're going to be more worried about the soft underbelly, not just because the Italians make an easier target, but you know what else the UK has in the Mediterranean? a bunch of stuff that a German guy named Rommel has already run over with tanks that they would very much like to get back. So the UK is going to be paying more attention. Not good, yeah, but he's rampaging in that area.
And the British are going to want to protect their holdings in the Middle East, especially Egypt, because of oil. Like that's a huge part of what the Brits are going to be concerned about.
We didn't talk about North Africa a little bit in our timeline again. Kind of Rommel gets caught between both pincers of the Americans coming in, the British coming out of Algeria. I think what is important to think about here is without that, and I realize that I just said maybe we don't make Monty a punchline, but I'm about to make Monty a punchline.
Oh no.
Because again, in like October of 42, in our timeline, October, November is the landings in French North Africa, but it also coincides with the Second Battle of El Alamein, where Monty, massively supplied with American equipment, pushes basically all the way out of Egypt and into Libya. And I think that still happens. I just think he stops, which he actually did in our timeline, stops about at the Mareth line, which you can kind of picture today as the border between Tunisia and Libya. It was built by the French to kind of protect Algeria and Tunisia from an Italian invasion. We all know how much the French loved their defensive lines and how well that worked out for them.
I was going to say, this is sounding very Maginot.
But Monty stops there. But that is where the British Army is in kind of our February 43 Tehran conference. That's the British promised offensive is we're going to finish off North Africa. We're going to push all the way through there and then start looking at Europe. The Americans are going to land on the continent. And this is kind of, again, like February 43. Hey, Stalingrad just fell. So Stalin himself is saying, well, we're going to be looking to expand, to start pushing back. And the British answer is going to be North Africa. The American answer is going to be Normandy.
Yeah. So I think that represents, one, what that does, especially compared to our timeline, is that between Normandy, France, the soft underbelly, Stalingrad, what that allows for the Allies and creates as a problem for the Germans, speaking of Operation Mincemeat, that creates operational flexibility because Hitler doesn't know exactly which one of these they're going to do or which two of these they're going to do until the Allies are already halfway down the road from wherever they started. So it presents a much greater problem for the Axis because they're only offensive on one of these fronts. Every single other one is defensive that they have to plan and react for. So I think they don't
know which one the Allies are going to try and make a major push on.
Exactly. So I think the fact that now that represents at least one additional actual front that the Axis has to plan an account and provide troops for creates a lot of dangerous possibilities for the Allies going forward out of Tehran, even if it's going to take them a while to get to the Mareth line or something like that. It's the component of of being able to force your enemy to react is a huge advantage in Europe for the Allies going forward.
So, do we kind of want to end it there with all of those things set up for the next time?
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to set it up because then that gives us a good touching off point to eventually, we promise, work our way back to the Pacific and get there. So yeah, I think that's a really good spot to end it. Any big last minute thoughts for anybody? Evan, I know you had one.
Yeah, well, that's one very far-flung possibility that I will get to in a second. But before I get to that, I was trying to think about what the Italian involvement would be in all of this, because they hit the change teams button in our timeline in September of 43. So I think with what we're setting up here, does this maybe delay the formal surrender or the formal change teams button, but in practice, in actuality, like, they're kind of a non-factor at this point. Is that where we see this going, or do we think that the armistice actually happens sooner with this, them seeing the writing on the wall and knowing that Churchill is now starting to pursue his long-held dreams? They're just kind of like, yep, nope, we're gonna do Italian things and get out while the getting's good.
I'm gonna do Italian things. I'm gonna do. I want to talk about that in the next episode.
Okay, let's do that.
I'm gonna say that I think is critical, which is this: it depends on what Churchill decides to do.
Yeah, and we'll set that up next time. I
believe that he necessarily thinks, kind of to what you were saying, maybe he has things that are more important to him than crossing off Italy.
Yeah. And I think especially with what we set up, that is a distinct possibility. But we'll leave that for next time. The one thing that I did want to mention was one of my favorite little just oddities and quirks of history are micronations. And around this time period in our timeline, we have a bunch of essentially they are like small little platforms out in British waters. Like a few of them were constructed during the course of our World War II. And one of them is now known as the Principality of Sealand. And if you want to look it up, it's a very interesting just set of circumstances, craziness going on involving German saboteurs in the 60s, I believe. So that's just a hoot. That's very interesting. But Dylan, what you basically said was that due to what's going on in this alternate timeline, one of the smallest and yet biggest casualties of the alternate timeline is we may not actually see these sorts of sea forts being built due to the changing of theaters and the changing of operational focus. Dylan, you want to spell that out a little bit for us?
Yeah, so we're talking about particularly because the British will take Guernsey and Jersey, these islands just off the coast of France. They don't have to create a couple of concrete pylons just off the coast, a little closer to the Netherlands, now known as, I believe formally it is the Republic of Sealand, which is one of the smallest micro quote unquote nations in the world at like a couple of 100 square feet, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, Evan.
Pretty much, yeah. And it is definitely not a republic. It is a principality with a
hereditary
monarchy.
That's right.
You got to get that right.
My apologies to the royal family of Sealand.
Yeah, Patty Roy Bates is resurrecting from the grave right now, and will I don't know what he's going to do, but he'll get very upset. He'll send a strongly worded letter with official royal letterhead.
Yeah, but basically Sealand is this like kind of weird, independent, kind of crazy person microstate that spouted up off of a sort of kind of supply boy dock concrete mini harbor that was built just off the coast of England, kind of in World War II, as sort of, an additional docking station for just for naval stuff in the war. But now you can literally go, I'm on it right now, sealandgov.org is the government of Sealand. They advertise themselves as the world's smallest country. So if we have Guernsey and Jersey taken over, we unfortunately will no longer have in our present day the world's smallest country. Well, we'll have one, but it won't be this one.
It won't be this one.
It'll be a slightly larger country that's the world's smallest country.
Exactly.
And
looping back to the territorial waters discussion, the only reason why this happened was because the UK only had its formal territorial waters defined as 3 nautical miles from its shoreline, and Sealand is like just barely outside of that. So that's the only reason.
3.2 or something.
Yeah, it's like 3.2, and so that's the only reason why this even happened to begin with. And then in the 80s, the UK was like, okay, we'll extend it to 12 nautical miles. So yeah, but I find it funny that the original court case about Sealand, the judge was basically like, well, the law says 3 nautical miles and it's 3.2, so I have no jurisdiction. I can't say anything. which I think is pretty funny. But anyway, enough of that little silly diversion. No Sealand. I think constructing an entire alternate history arc about No Sealand and just how profound an impact that has on world affairs. You'll see that on the next chapter of my secret fan fiction website that totally doesn't exist. But anyway, guys, anybody else have any other thoughts?
No, and maybe this is setting something up for part two, but since we don't have part 2 or 3, whatever, Chris is throwing up various fingers because he's going to turn this into a 12-part miniseries from Ken Burns or something. One thing that I am curious, because we didn't talk about it at all today, we didn't talk about it in the setup at all. I am very curious to see what happens, however crazy it ends up being, with someone who right now is in this timeline currently still the field marshal of the Philippine Army.
Oh, yes.
So just going to set up a teaser that may or may not pay off a couple hours down the road for future episodes.
Yes. I'll be very interested. I will look forward to I will look. How does that line from Phantom Menace go? We will watch your career with great interest.
Yeah. We will watch his career with great interest.
We will watch his career with great interest. All right. Well, with all of that being said, thank you all so much, everyone, for tuning in. Let us know what you think on the Discord, as always. And if we stumble across a fork in time, what do you think we should do with it?
Tora, take it.
I think so. I think that sounds great. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in. Have a good day.
Thanks for listening to A Fork in Time, the alternate history podcast. Learn more and provide feedback by visiting our website at www.aforkintimepodcast.com. Connect to us on Facebook at facebook.com/aforkintime or follow us on Twitter at AFIT Podcast. If you want to support the show financially, visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/aforkintime. We hope you will join us next time.